Hello. In this video I would like to demonstrate how I sharpen woodworking tools. I'll be using a chisel, but the same principles apply to sharpening a plane iron. The only difference with the plane iron is that you will want to bevel the corners slightly. So in other words, with a chisel I'm just going to keep it flat. With a plane iron I would bevel the very edges a little bit so that they don't dig into the wood when I create a surface. I'm going to be using a fine India stone, a hard Arkansas, and a strop. For oil, always use your stones with oil if you're using oil stones. I would suggest either just plain old 3-in-1 oil or any type of mineral oil will work. You can also get special honing oil from different companies such as Dan's or Martin. But any of these work. I find that the thinner the oil, the quicker it cuts, but the thicker the oil, the more that it helps to kind of keep the shavings from clogging your stone. Definitely make sure that you use an oil that does not go rancid. So that's why I suggest mineral oil, and always keep your stones clean, wash off, and or pat off the oil. So I actually like, believe it or not, most people don't do this, but I actually like a little bit of a thicker oil for my coarser stones like this fine India. Just gonna spread it on there a bit. Because the really thin oils can kind of soak into the stone a little too much, in my opinion. Now, you're going to want an angle around 30 degrees. If you go too steep, you won't have as fine an edge, and if you go too shallow, you won't have a durable edge. So, how do you find 30 degrees? Well, this is 90, right? So half of that, about here, would be 45. And, whoa, but we've got, if we go half again, we'll get, what, 22 and a half? So somewhere between 45 and 22 and a half is about 30, right there. Now, I like to sharpen with a slight camber. So that means that the bevel of my blade is not going to actually be perfectly straight. It's actually going to be slightly curved. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to go over this angle of 30, but I will go a little under. And I'll work it kind of, you'll see the angle just changing ever so slightly. And the reason I like that slightly convex geometry to the edge is because if it's perfectly flat and you register it perfectly flat against the stone, what will happen is the tool will stick to the stone as you're sharpening really, really hard. It'll lock with suction. And that makes it just really difficult to sharpen, at least for me. And it requires a lot of strength in your fingers. So I prefer to kind of reduce that friction by having a convex geometry, so only a little bit of the steel is touching the stone at any one time. The most important thing with this is to just be patient and to not go over the angle that you're shooting for. It's fine to go a little under, but if you keep climbing and climbing and climbing, trying to get to the edge, then you will wind up with a geometry that's far too steep. So what we're going to do is just kind of remember to work the back down. You don't want to, every time you sharpen, to keep getting steeper and steeper. So definitely remember to work the back down on your stone, especially on your coarser stones. And now, as you're doing this, keep checking the edge. I start to feel a little bit of a burr. So what I'm doing here is I'm feeling for a burr, because what happens when you abrade the metal on one side is it will bend the metal at the very tip in this direction, right? In the opposite direction. And of course we don't want that in the final edge, but it's a very good indication as a beginner that you got down to the edge. Because what could be happening is that you're just working on the kind of like the upper part, the back here, and you're not getting all the way down to the edge. So by checking for that burr, you know that you got down to the edge all the way and you actually went past it a little bit. So I actually feel one right now. So I don't really need to keep going, but I'm just going to make it kind of turn a little bit bigger burr just to make sure that I got all the way across the whole length of the edge. Sometimes, especially if you have not got a completely flat stone, you might, or you're not putting equal pressure, you might not get all the way across the edge. And notice that when I'm doing this, I try to use as much of the stone surface as possible. So I kind of work in, I like to work in short motions sometimes. Sometimes I like to work in long motions. But you notice that I try to use the whole surface, and sometimes you can even hang your tool off the edge of the stone a little bit. And this is ensuring that you are wearing the stone evenly and that it's staying flat, or at least more flat than if you were to just if you're just working in the same spot all the time. You're going to create a very deep indentation into your stone. So you don't want to do that. And I also like to work with these little short strokes on the ends here, right? Because those you tend to wear your stone in this kind of direction. So anyway, that's more than enough work on the bevel. So now that we've created that burr and it's kind of turned up like that, you can feel it with your finger. If you run your finger like that, you'll feel this little kind of bit of metal that's been bent backwards. So you want to remove that because that obviously doesn't make for a good edge. When you do this, you have to be aware of where your stone might be out of flat. So for example, I like to always make sure my stone is flat in this direction. You can do that very simply by kind of using the back of your stone, your chisel, like this, right? And so I know that though it might be bowed a little bit in this direction, it's going to be straight this way, across. So I want to orient the blade like this. Right? Most people probably do it this way, right? But if you don't keep your stone perfectly flat, that's a bad idea. So you just keep going and checking the edge there. And I think I've pretty much got it all. It seems like it might be ever so slightly out of flat. When you first sharpen your chisel or a plane arm, you're going to need to flatten the back, because it probably will not come flat entirely from the factory. So that's plenty good on the fine India. When you're done with your oil stone, you don't need to use as much oil as I just threw on there. Just kind of put a little extra oil, lift up the shavings like this, and wipe it down or pat it down. And that will keep your stone from clogging. I also occasionally wash my oil stones with hot water and soap. Now, this actually probably a little bit thinner oil is going to do better. So now I'm going to the soft Arkansas here. And normally I would be a lot quicker in this process, but I'm stopping to kind of explain everything. So I'm going to go back to my flat side, I think, maybe. Now these, I may have forgot to mention in some of my previous videos dealing with different stones. These Arkansas stones stay very flat. At least the harder ones do. So you don't have to worry too much about. So you see, I was working on the back just now. Now I check the side with my fingertip, and I can feel that same burr. It's now on the top here. So I'm going to flip it around, and I'm going to sharpen like so. Again, kind of trying to use the whole surface of the stone. I may have a little bit much oil on here. You'll get a sense for how much to use with experience. Sometimes too much can kind of suspend your tool above the stone, but too little and your stone will start to clog and cut slowly. So I'm actually not all the way down to the edge yet, so I'm just slightly under that angle, 30 degrees. And now I'm just about there. Yeah. So now I'm going to get very, at the end here, I'm going to get very light. You see I went all the way down. If you press down too hard at the end, you're trying to remove that burr that I keep talking about by working it back and forth and being very, very light. If you put a lot of downwards pressure at the end, you're going to keep creating that burr, and you won't be able to get rid of it. So you want to be very gentle. And I like to kind of remove the burr on the strop. And actually, I'm going to kind of test it, because I think I might have completely removed the burr, or mostly removed the burr, just on the stone. And I'm going to test it with a piece of paper, and kind of see if I have a reasonably sharp edge at this point. And I do. And actually that is perfectly usable right there for most things that you will ever do with a chisel, except maybe paring in grain. Actually, even that's sharp enough to pare in grain. But I'm going to take it a a step further and go to the strop here because I want to make a little point about stropping. So, a lot of people are very careful with the strop, and that's kind of a good thing, but I think people are a little too afraid of the strop. And the reason that they're afraid of it, or that they're careful, is that because it is a flexible medium, in other words, this is leather, and it has some give to it, what it does is it kind of conforms to the shape of whatever you're using, right? Whatever your tool is. But what can happen is that if it's you press down too hard, is that it might conform too much and round off your edge. So you can imagine that if I have a very soft surface here and I press down real hard, you can see how that creates a very steep angle that could blunt my edge. But if you're not using a very, unless you're using a just like some really thick, soft leather, I don't think there's a big chance of that happening. Just make sure you have a hard-backed strop that is reasonably firm-ish. I've never had a problem even using actually very vigorous force when stropping, and I'll prove that maybe at the end of the video if I can find a piece of scrap wood that I'm not changing the geometry. So if you had ended on something like this India instead of this this hard Arkansas, you may need to do more stropping. So I'm going to demonstrate. I'm probably going to go overboard here, but I'm going to be demonstrating that you don't need to be afraid of stropping a lot. As long as you keep your chisel or your plain iron, whatever you're sharpening, as long as you keep it, as long as you don't start doing weird motions. So I don't think that people generally are dulling. I don't think it's the strop's fault if you dub your edge. I think it's more user error, because people, when they're stropping this backwards motion, they have a tendency to want to do this, right? You see how at the end there, you're rounding off your edge. So just keep that level and straight back, right? And you can go 30, 40 times if you have to. This strop is leather, and it's loaded with the green metal polishing compound. I believe it's called the chromium oxide. And that's just kind of, you can buy it in a large bar, about actually as big as one of these stones, and it will last you for a long time. Forever, essentially. So that's probably fine. Now, even with a strop, you can create a microscopic burr. So I'm going to flip around and remove any tiny burr that might be on the side. But I'm going to be very careful in doing so, because I want to keep the back of my chisel flat. Because if I create too much of a bevel on the backside by accident, then what will happen is that the next time I try removing the burr and flattening it, you see the edge will not be level with the rest of the back of the chisel, and we really want to be able to register that chisel totally flat on a piece of wood and take off any high areas or bumps that might occur. So you don't want a bevel on the flat side here. And because this is a soft medium, it can deform and it can create a slight bevel. So just be careful of that. So I'm going to go a whole lot lighter and more carefully and fewer times on the back here. So that's plenty good. So now it's going to be pretty much as sharp an edge as you'll ever need. If you were sharpening something like a straight razor, then you would probably want to progress to a plain leather strop. You could also use a plain leather strop without the compound if you ended on something like this translucent Arkansas. So that's my method for sharpening tools and chisels in particular, and I'll probably do some more videos on sharpening other things such as plane irons or even kitchen knives, because I think that's a wider appeal to might appeal to more people. But that's the basics of sharpening, especially sharpening something with a bevel on one side and a flat back on the other. And you'll find this, you can use the same method to sharpen, for example, certain Japanese kitchen knives that also have a flat bevel on one side and a flat side and a bevel, right? You just want to keep that flat side as flat as you possibly can and work on the bevel side and work back and forth to remove the burr.